Neocons. Neoconservatism began in the United States among mid-20th century liberals who felt disillusioned with the left's response to the Cold War and the 1967 Six-Day War. Irving Kristol famously described a neocon as a liberal who has been mugged by reality, reflecting the shift of former New Deal and anti-communist Democrats toward a more hawkish outlook. Neocons are united by a belief in American exceptionalism and a foreign policy that actively defends democratic allies and confronts authoritarian regimes. Support for Israel is a core pillar. They see the U.S.-Israel alliance as vital both strategically and morally. On social issues, neoconservatives range from moderately traditional to more libertarian, generally prioritizing foreign policy over culture war battles. In today's media landscape, commentators such as Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and Dennis Prager echo key neocon themes of strong defense, robust pro-Israel advocacy, and skepticism toward leftist ideology. Populists. Right-wing populists frame politics as a contest between ordinary citizens and entrenched elites, promoting national sovereignty, strict immigration control, and economic measures such as tariffs or domestic industry protection. Their style blends nationalism with cultural traditionalism and often overlaps with traditional conservatives on family-centered values and with ethno-nationalists on calls for tighter border policies, though most reject overt racial politics. The MAGA movement, centered on Donald Trump's campaigns and presidency, has supercharged this populist energy by channeling frustration with political, media, and corporate establishments. Its rallies, online presence, and grassroots networks have made anti-establishment rhetoric a mainstream Republican force. Media figures such as Tucker Carlson and Steven Crowder amplify these themes, helping move populist critiques of elites from the fringes to primetime popularity and giving them a lasting influence on U.S. conservative politics. Libertarian centers on individual liberty and voluntary association, advocating minimal or even no government. Its spectrum runs from minarchists, who want only a night watchman state for courts and defense, to anarcho-capitalists, who overlap philosophically with some anarchist traditions by rejecting all coercive authority. Unlike left anarchists, they embrace private property and market institutions, so their anti-statism is economic as well as political. Many libertarians hold that morality should arise from individual choice rather than state decree. Critics sometimes view this as a rejection of collective ethics. In debate with pro-state thinkers, they draw a sharp friend versus enemy line, treating statists as opponents of liberty. Notable figures include Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Robert Nozick, Ayn Rand, and contemporary voices such as Ron Paul, Rand Paul, and David D. Friedman, who popularized libertarian economic and political arguments. Technocrats. This faction champions rule by expertise and rapid technological progress, arguing that innovation, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, space exploration, and advanced energy, is the surest path to national strength and human flourishing. Sometimes called techno-optimist conservatives, they share libertarians' enthusiasm for entrepreneurial freedom and light regulation, but they are more open to targeted state partnerships or strategic subsidies to speed breakthroughs. Their outlook is strongly meritocratic and elite-driven, preferring decisions by highly skilled innovators over mass politics. Figures such as Elon Musk exemplify the belief that bold technological ventures can solve structural problems, while Peter Thiel has funded projects and thinkers who critique both progressive orthodoxy and traditional conservatism. Thiel's protege, J.D. Vance, mixes this techno-optimism with populist themes. Intellectually, some circles echo Nietzschean admiration for exceptional individuals and a revaluation of values, celebrating the creative power of visionary elites. Tradcons. Traditional conservatives emphasize a conscious return to tradition, holding that enduring moral and religious principles, rather than transient social trends, form the bedrock of a healthy society. They argue that stable institutions such as family, church, and local community nurture virtue, and that liberty depends on a shared moral order. Central to their worldview is a clear distinction between good and evil, often rooted in Christian morality, which guides their positions on issues like marriage, sexuality, and the sanctity of life. Economically, they generally support markets, but believe economic freedom should be shaped by moral responsibility and cultural cohesion. Prominent contemporary voices who popularize these themes include commentators Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, and John Doyle, each advocating a culturally confident conservatism that seeks to strengthen faith, family, and long-standing social norms against what they view as progressive moral decline. Mano-Sphere. The modern Mano-Sphere is a collection of online communities and personalities focused on men's roles, masculinity, and gender dynamics. Its spectrum runs from mainstream self-help to more combative, controversial voices. On the widely accessible side, Jordan Peterson speaks about personal responsibility, psychological resilience, and the importance of traditional structures such as family and community, generally avoiding overt partisan alignment. At the more confrontational end, Influencers like Andrew Tate and the hosts of the Fresh and Fit podcast stress financial independence, physical fitness, and what they frame as male empowerment, while drawing criticism for adversarial commentary on women and relationships. Though political leanings differ, some followers identify as conservative, libertarian, or apolitical. The central theme is men reclaiming agency and developing competence through discipline, self-improvement, and a rejection of what they perceive as the erosion of traditional masculine identity. Groypers, the Groyper movement, is a loosely organized network of far-right online activists closely tied to live streamer Nick Fuentes. Presenting themselves as a harder-line alternative to mainstream conservatism, they emphasize strong social conservative themes, such as opposition to abortion and support for traditional religious and family norms. Groypers overlap with other segments of the online right, including certain traditionalist, Catholic, and nationalist currents, while criticizing establishment Republicans for cultural compromise. Rather than growing through broad grassroots organizing, the movement seeks influence through an elitist, top-down strategy, cultivating prominent personalities, creating tightly knit digital networks, and staging high-profile confrontations to shape debate. It appeals especially to disaffected young men who feel alienated from mainstream politics or social institutions. The movement also positions itself in direct opposition to neoconservatives, criticizing them for promoting interventionist foreign policy and for diluting conservative cultural and religious priorities. Identitarians, identitarian movements, are loosely connected groups that argue cultural or ethnic identity, not simply shared citizenship, should be the foundation of political community. Originating mainly in Europe in the early 21st century, they advocate ethnopluralism, claiming that distinct peoples and cultures must remain separate to preserve their heritage. This puts them at odds with civic nationalists, who define nationhood by shared laws and values rather than ancestry. Within the right, identitarians overlap with populists in criticizing mass immigration and globalism, yet differ in their sometimes elitist posture. Many emphasize an intellectual or high culture defense of Western civilization and cultivate tight-knit activist circles rather than broad grassroots appeal. Critics argue that despite cultural framing, their rhetoric often shades into racial or exclusionary politics. Their influence are exemplified by figures such as Keith Woods, Jared Taylor, and Steve Saylor. Nietzscheans. Nietzschean thinkers draw from Friedrich Nietzsche's critique of conventional morality and his distinction between master and slave morality. Master morality, drawn from the aristocratic values of ancient civilizations, such as those depicted in Homeric epics, celebrates strength, excellence, and the creative assertion of power, while slave morality, arising from the oppressed, elevates humility and egalitarianism. Contemporary right-leaning Nietzscheans often reinterpret these ideas as a call to reject mass conformity and embrace a culture led by exceptional individuals. This perspective emphasizes elitism, favoring the guidance of a creative, high-achieving few rather than the will of the majority. Online writers and personalities like Bronze Age Pervert popularize a proto-modern version of Nietzsche's call for a revaluation of values, urging a revival of ancient heroic ideals and bodybuilding, and a critique of both modern liberal egalitarianism and conventional religious conservatism. Neo-reactionaries. Neo-reaction, often abbreviated NRX, is an online intellectual movement that arose in the late 2000s as a critique of liberal democracy and modern egalitarian ideals. It argues that mass democracy produces inefficiency, cultural decay, and what its writers call the cathedral, a self-reinforcing network of media, universities, and bureaucracy that shapes public opinion. NRX thinkers advocate replacing popular rule with stronger, more centralized forms of governance, sometimes envisioning a CEO-style monarch or a network of private city-states. The movement is deliberately elitist, valuing order, hierarchy, and technological acceleration over popular participation. Drawing on a mix of historical and philosophical sources, its early discussions were shaped by bloggers such as Curtis Yarvin, whose essays inspired ongoing debates about post-democratic forms of government